Aristotle was known for a lot of different things, a lot of different philosophies, a lot of different ideas. You may know him from the Nicomachean Ethics or the Politics, but one of his works that I truly feel like just doesn't get enough light, doesn't get enough attention, is De Caelo, or On the Heavens. This work closely examines what Aristotle believed to be our place in the universe, and the place of the heavens, and the place of God, and all of these different things. And although the ideas are beautiful and seem to make so much sense, we've learned that he was just flat out wrong. He was completely and utterly wrong about so many different parts. And I think this is one of his works that is the most factually incorrect, but it is one of the most interesting and fascinating, because sometimes it's just strange to remember that a human came up with these ideas, with these things, with no resources at his disposal, with no real evidence about anything. And most of this was just a guessing game. And it kind of goes to show, at least in my opinion, that people can truly make up their own religions. You can believe in whatever you want to believe, and it feels true and right to you. And that's kind of what De Caelo is to me, you know? Aristotle made some amazing and beautiful points that almost feel romantic in a way. Everything has its place, everything has its purpose, and everything has its timeline, either infinite or impermanent. So, I have done an extensive amount of research on De Caelo, and I have written a whole paper on a whole research paper, and I have some notes in front of me, and I just want to go through and kind of explain the subject matter of De Caelo, and kind of what his arguments were, what the basis of this philosophy was, and what he got wrong about it, because there's several things that we know now from modern science that were very incorrect back in the day. So, the backbone of De Caelo is a scale. The book is called On the Heavens, right? So there's obviously going to be some part about the heavens. So let's pretend there's a scale right here, okay? So over here, we have the heavens. We have the celestial realm, which is the outer space pretty much, the planets, stars, all of that stuff, the ether, which I'll explain in a little bit. We have that on the side of the heavenly realm. And way down at the other side of the scale, we have the simple bodies. The simple bodies are earth, air, fire, and water. And they are the farthest from intelligence that anything else on the scale is. So part of the heavenly realm is Aristotle's idea of God. Now, when you think of God, you may think of like the Christian God, or you may think of the Greek gods like Zeus, Athena, all of them, or any of the other vast amount of religions out there. But Aristotle kind of invented his own. He invented a God that worked for him and made sense to him, and I think that that's beautiful. His God was thought. His God was the act of thinking, and this scale kind of exists in De Caelo to show which elements of our world are closest to this God of thinking, which elements are closest and have the most intelligence and are within reach of being perfect, if that makes sense. So I'm going to kind of go through the whole scale. So like I said, we have heaven over here, the heavenly realm. Over here we have the simple bodies. After the simple bodies we have plants, and then it's animals, and then there's humans, and humans kind of have a two-part thing going on here. So humans are obviously the most intelligent creature that we know of. And the part two to that is that Aristotle believed that yes, humans were intelligent, and they were pretty much the closest you could get to this God of thought, that this of perfect thought, of perfect being through thought. But he believed more so that philosophers were closest to that, more than just the regular human, because they're constantly exercising this, constantly exercising their brain, and constantly on the search for something bigger, on the search for meaning, for explanations of why we exist, of why the earth is here, why it is the way that it is, you know? So philosophers were considered closer to the heavenly realm than humans were. So then after philosophers, we get back into the heavenly bodies, which again is the planets, the stars, all of that, and the overall heavenly realm and his God and all of that. So I feel like that's kind of the way that helps me understand this whole book of philosophy the best, to remember that everything is kind of on the scale of importance to him. And you'll kind of learn that Aristotle values things that are perfect and eternal as opposed to things that decompose and fall apart and are overall impermanent. So at this point, he kind of breaks the universe into two parts, which again goes into the permanent, impermanent thing. So we have the sublunary realm, which is you and I, this is Earth, all of the things on Earth, animals, plants, the simple bodies. These are all of the things that decompose and are impermanent. And then we have celestial realm, which again is everything that is perfect and eternal and will last forever. Aristotle believed that these things were eternal and perfect because of their circular motion. So this is kind of where you begin to see that his philosophy is factually incorrect and has been proved wrong by science. So he had a geocentric view of the world. He defended this model, which essentially places the Earth at the center of the universe instead of the sun, which we know to be true now. So he places the Earth at the center of the universe, and with the celestial realm, his whole argument is that these bodies, the planets, are perfect and they are unchanging because they have this perfect circular motion around the Earth. And that circular motion is what keeps them eternal and what keeps them unchanging and perfect. So kind of keep that in mind. He really loves this idea of the eternal. So let's move back to simple bodies. I'm going to come back to the whole geocentric model of the world because that's a very big part of it. But so the simple bodies, earth, air, fire, and water, he talks about how they have contrary motions, contrary movements. So each one has their own contrary. So fire and water are contraries, and then we have earth and air that are also contraries. And the movements of the simple bodies are imperfect because, remember, like I said, the eternal motion, the eternal circular motion of the celestial bodies was what made them perfect. The simple bodies move in kind of, he considers to be simple movements, but they're impermanent. So they move in lines, so to and from something. They move to the earth, away from the earth, up and down, side to side, whatever it be. And these movements are what causes the simple body to have an end and have a beginning. So basically, the movements in the celestial realm are ungenerated and indestructible, but the ones in the sublunary realm are impermanent and will decompose, essentially. So he kind of solidifies what he wants to talk about with the simple bodies, the four elements, and then he brings in this idea of a fifth element. This is kind of where it gets really unique to Aristotle's philosophy, other than like the fact that his god is thought and thinking. He argues that there is a fifth substance, a fifth element called the ether, and the ether, yes, it's considered an element to him, but it is entirely different than the simple bodies. So the simple bodies are down here on the scale, and ether exists up here with the heavenly realm. Ether is considered part of the unmoved mover, and the unmoved mover, if you've studied Aristotle, is probably something you've heard about before. Unmoved mover is what Aristotle considers the reason that these planets move in perfect eternal circular motions around the Earth. It's what keeps them moving, and the unmoved mover itself is not moved, but it moves. So he kind of reasons with himself and proposes this idea that there must be something moving the planets, there must be some reason that they have this eternal motion, and that thing, because it provides this eternal motion, it must also be part of the heavenly realm. It must also be perfect and unchanging. I'm going to read you a quote directly from De Caelo. For in the whole range of the time past, so far as our inherited records reach, no change appears to have taken place either in the whole scheme of the outermost heaven or any of its proper parts. And so, implying that the primary body is something else beyond earth, fire, air, and water, they gave the highest place the name of its own, ether, derived from the fact that it runs always for an eternity of time. So, it's higher than the simple bodies in importance. It's closer to intelligence. It's closer to the state of perfection. And he also notes that it is not heaven itself, but it is a part of this heavenly realm, right? So that's kind of where ether falls into the program, I guess. So it kind of, at this point, there's a hierarchy, right? We're seeing the things that are obviously impermanent and the things that are permanent and perfect and eternal and unchanging, right? So it's really just, like, to me, it just feels like a distinct split down the middle of these two realms, the sublunary and the celestial. So now I'm going to get into the fun part. which is all of the reasons that his philosophies in this were incorrect. Um, the first one being is, we're going to bring it back to the whole geocentrism thing. So geocentrism was something that was proposed by Ptolemy, and it was an idea that Aristotle adopted into his own philosophies, and he felt like it made the most sense that the earth was at the center of all this, because it felt like, you know, from the perspective of a human that could only see so much at that time with the lack of technology, it did feel like everything moves around the earth, right? Everything is moving, you know, we're seeing these things move in the sky. So I understand why he thought that and why he could, you know, make that judgment. And generally, geocentrism was an idea that was widely agreed up until Copernicus proposed the idea of heliocentrism, which places the sun at the center of the universe. And Aristotle did not like this. He did not like this, and he very, very strongly opposed it. And I'll read you another quote directly from De Caelo. All who deny that the earth lies at the center think that it revolves about the center, and not the earth only, but as we said before, the counter-earth as well. So he's really, really insistent on the fact that Copernicus was wrong about this. But we know in modern times and modern science that heliocentrism is the correct model. The heliocentric model is the correct model of the earth, right? Or not of the earth, of the universe, excuse me. We know that the sun is the center of our universe. And he kind of also based this because of the simple bodies, which I said before kind of move in linear movements. So they're kind of going towards or away from a common point, with the earth being that grounding. They're either going or coming to the earth, right? And he kind of reasoned that this common point must be the earth, right? The earth is the center of the universe based off of all of these movements that he's seen. And kind of on that same note, that was why he believed that the heavens were above and outside of earth, basically. And because he believes that all of the heavenly realm moves in circular motions, that the heavens and the planets and all of these things move in circular motions, the only way for that to be true in his philosophy is if the earth is at the center. If the sun were at the center, it essentially means that everything would be moving around the sun. And if earth was part of that, right, then that would mean that the earth is part of this eternal, unchanging perfection that moves in a circular motion that he, you know, constitutes to all of the heavenly realm. So that just wouldn't work in his mind, right? Because then the earth would be part of something celestial, which it wasn't in his philosophy. So that means the only possible way for his philosophy to work was if the earth was at the center, because then the earth wouldn't be moving. It's the only stationary thing in which the simple bodies can move away or towards whatever it be, in which things can be impermanent and not move in a perfect circular motion. The other kind of major thing that was wrong with his philosophy that, like, just this by itself instantly disproved it, if not for the geocentrism thing, was the fact that our planets move in ellipses. Ellipses are not perfect circles. They're not perfect, eternal, unchanging circles. And obviously he had really no way of telling this without the technology to know, right? So it's just kind of funny to think about. We know now that our planets move in ellipses, not circles. And that idea was proposed by Johannes Kepler in the 1600s. So that means that there was almost 2,000 years between when Aristotle proposed his idea that all of the planets moved in circular motions and when Kepler proposed that the planets actually moved in ellipses. And we still, to this day, follow pretty closely to Kepler's laws of planetary motion, right? That's kind of the modern understanding of what happens out there, right? But obviously Aristotle had no idea of that in like 350 BC. So that, unfortunately, is like geocentrism, the whole thing. I can understand that, you know, that kind of makes sense in my mind, but this fact truly just, it wipes the foundation of everything he had built with this philosophy. And kind of on that note as well, I think about that 2,000-year period between when Aristotle proposed his idea and when Kepler proposed his idea, right? And people still were actively believing in, you know, they took Aristotle's words to heart. They were finding meaning through his words. And I think even if it was incorrect, if it gave someone meaning in their life, if it helped them find peace with what's out there, what's the unknown, then it was all worth it, you know? And we are able to come back and study this in such a beautiful way, even though it's so incredibly wrong. Kind of the other thing on the note of ellipses too is he had this idea that there was simple motions and complex motions, and he believed that there was the simple motions were circular and linear, right? And then the complex bodies were things like squares and triangles and rectangles. I truly don't even think that this is an idea that he could have fathomed, you know? There's no way for him, you know, he only knows what was available to him at this point. So the planets moving in ellipses probably didn't even occur to him. It didn't even cross his mind, you know? It's not something that existed in his scale of simple movement and complex movement. Kind of the last big part of what disproves this theory is, again, we're going back to the concept of ether. Now, we know ether is not a real thing. Ether is something that, again, I think was made up just as a way for him to explain why the planets move in these perfect motions. But we know now from science, thank you science, that our planet is made up of gases and rocks and metals and all of those things out in outer space too. These are all things that we've been able to trace and understand. You know, we understand the concept of gravity. We understand that there's all of these other forces that play part, and they are, most of them, physical substance or physical somethings, you know? No one has ever found anything in the universe that resembles Aristotle's idea of the ether, which is kind of sad, you know? It's funny, I'm rooting for him to be right, but yeah, no, definitely not right. And again, he really deeply argued that all of the things in the celestial realm and the heavenly bodies did not change. They were perfect and eternal, right? But we know that stars die. We know that planets grow and develop, or they, you know, things happen to them. There's changes in their temperatures and their all of these different things that, you know, make them up. And that means that they're not perfect and eternal and unchanging. And while there is things about space that are predictable, most of it, I would argue, is pretty unpredictable. We understand the motions, we understand, you know, the different elements that play a part in it, right? But you can't always tell when a star is about to start dying, or when it's about to, you know, when all these different things happen. And to Aristotle, the heavenly bodies cannot possess the impermanent and changeable features of the sublunary bodies. That was his whole argument, is that these two things are so completely different and they are distinguishable from one another, because one is imperfect and one is perfect, right? One is eternal and one is decomposing as we speak. But one of the first times Aristotle's theory was really and truly challenged was when Tycho's supernova of 1572 was discovered. So Tycho discovered the supernova in the constellation Cassiopeia, which is known as one of the brightest. And of course it was puzzling to him and everyone else, because they believed this idea that Aristotle had given them, that everything was unchanging out there in outer space, right? So that alone completely uprooted everything, that all the foundations that Aristotle had laid in his theories. And obviously after that, astronomers, mathematicians, all of these people went on to discover more and more things that disproved his theory, and also just new parts of the universe and outer space. So I guess to kind of conclude this, I just want to say that even the best philosophers make errors, right? And this, I think philosophy is different than a lot of his other work, because it is theorizing, it's like theorizing on stuff that is very much factual, as opposed to ethicality and that kind of stuff, right? And considering he came up with all of these ideas without any of the tools we have access to today, whether that be the internet, whether that be scientific materials, whether that be modern math, all of these things, the fact that he came up with all of this by himself, I think, is pretty amazing. It held a really beautiful depth, and it resonated with people for a reason, because it seemed believable. You know, he didn't have the evidence, but he had the foundations of a really good idea that made sense, you know? And if all else fails, it can just be, this type of thing can be a very thought-provoking reflection on how we see the world now, and how grateful we should be for modern inventions and modern discoveries. So that's kind of all I have to say about De Caelo. I just wanted to share that because I just don't hear anyone talking about this side of Aristotle's philosophy, and I think it's so beautiful and so fascinating. thank you so much for being here. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it was a little educational. If you have other thoughts or something that you want to correct me on, please feel free. I'm always open to listen to that. So thank you so much. Bye.